So it's a new tier list time. If you guys want to know what decks are the best to climb with, I'm going to give them to you right now, and then also give you a couple of honorable mentions at the end for more fun decks that have more unique things if you want that. So basically, I'll have a timestamp when I switch to the more fun decks, but let's just jump into it. First, we have Secret Libram Paladin. Statistically, best deck in the game, stomps everything. I can't tell you how many stories I've heard on my stream in the chat of people saying, like, I just switched to Secret Libram Paladin, went like 17-4, and made my legend run the other day. The deck is broken. You got basically all the strong things that existed before with Paladin, except a nerfed first day of school now. But you have potentially better late game. Because potentially, like, you can go infinite with the Librams. And then on top of that, you still have the good secret synergy, which is just really, really, really broken in Paladin right now, and some good draw engines. So you outdraw several classes, you out-tempo most classes, and you have a good enough late game to sometimes finish them off as well. So overall, really solid deck. If you want to take something out and run an AAECAZICAA for a little bit of extra burst late game, you can. It's actually a valid tech, and that's about it. Let's jump into the next one. Next one is Face Hunter. Face Hunter is just absolutely broken right now. There's a lot of like slower decks right now that are trying to like slow down the meta, and Face Hunter does really, really well at just destroying that. Because the other decks are like, oh, I'm gonna stall some timeout, I'm playing against a slower meta, I have a little bit more time. Face Hunter's like, no, if you don't do something, you will die on turn 7 every single game, even if I have a bad starting hand. And that's just what Face Hunter does. It has the burst and consistent damage to beat decks like Priest or Warrior. Although, Warrior, because of armor, is a little bit harder. I'd say Warrior is probably one of your worst matchups. You got the damage to kill rogues and mages before they can kill you. And I'd say Paladin is your only bad matchup, but to be fair, Paladin is absolutely broken right now, like I said. And even then, the matchup's not that bad, especially if you can get out an early Kalakar pack runner and get some 1/1s on the board by coining this out turn 1 maybe, if the opponent doesn't have anything turn 1. Like, let's say the Paladin plays first day of school now, because that's a relatively normal turn 1 play. So they play that, you coin out Kalakar runner, and then they play some 1-drops. You play 1 or 2 little spells, kill off their minions, and then you take over the board from there. Overall, the deck is really, really fun. It's really, really good. It's moderately fun. Special place in my heart because it's the deck I got to Legend first with like 3-4 years ago with a budget Face Hunter. So it's always going to have a special place in my heart. So I'm apologizing now if it seems like I'm a little biased, but it's really, really good. Next on the list is Token Druid, but I think I want to put Druid as the 3rd overall just in general, because Token Druid's really strong and really, really cheap, but another deck that I would probably put as like 4th, somewhere between 4th and 6th, is Ramp Druid. Because the meta is slightly slower now, Ramp Druid is doing really, really well. Because Mage was nerfed, and Mage was a deck that this deck struggled against a little bit, and with that being played a little bit less and having a little bit less damage, this deck has the opportunity to shine. Face Hunter, like I said, is a really powerful deck, but isn't played as much as I think it should be, so that gives you opportunity to play the Primordial Druid. And then with Token Druid, you can take on the form of the Aggressor. Basically, you wait until about turn 1, 2, or 3 with Gibberling, especially if you have Coin, Innervate, or Lightning Bloom. You pop off really early, and then you refill your hand with Fungal Fortunes, Guess the Weight, and Nature Studies. And then Glowfly Swarm on turn 5. Then, if you can, potentially play Soul the Forest, Arbor Up, make your board a little bit more beefy, and then you win. Overall, both of these decks are really, really strong and take advantage of the slightly slower meta now. So I would highly recommend trying these out if you haven't already. And there's no reason to not try out Token Druid because it's super duper cheap. So the next list is Secret or Miracle Rogue. I don't know if this is necessarily the build you want to go with. There are a lot of different ways to build this. So there are a decent number of decks out there right now that run the Sparkjoy cheat, which is definitely valid. Like, I personally don't like running the Sparkjoy cheat. I have other cards in here that I think are more valuable, like the Pen Flinger and Brain Freeze to combo with the Field Contact, because this can draw me a ton of cards, and with Brain Freeze can help me into aggro. But you can definitely run this card as well if you want, if you don't want to run these two. But overall, the deck is really strong. You have late game burst with AAECAZICAA, Tenwu, that can very likely do 24 to 32 damage over the course of 2 turns, if not on 1 turn, if you get lucky enough to reduce the cost of both of them with Efficient Octobot. It can be ridiculous. So yeah, you have that along with a couple of Shadow Steps, obviously. So over the course of 2 turns, you can do 32 damage, maybe even 1. You have great tempo with cards like the Efficient Octobot to make your cards cheaper. Insane Draw. You have Mankrik, Kazakis, and Jandis to get you some good stuff. Not to mention some of the best draw in the game. And decent removal with Blackjack Stunner and Prize Plunderer. So overall, this deck is an absolute masterpiece. I would recommend it, although it is, really hard to play. So that is a downside to this, but it's not as hard to play as the next deck on this list. So if you want a hard deck that's not too hard, go with this one. But if you really want a challenge, let's jump into the next one. So the second to last deck is OTK Demon Hunter. OTK Demon Hunter is a really interesting deck because it is, in my opinion, probably the hardest deck to play super effectively. I hear stories all the time of like, Ecor, I have less than a 40% win rate with this deck. It cannot be good. But like, if you really take the time to learn it, I have had a 65 or better % win rate with this deck every single season for the past like 4 or 5 seasons, except for the very first season. The first season I played, it was bad because it takes a while to learn how to play this deck. You need to manage hand size so you can Skull of Gul'dan and not overdraw cards, along with Spectral Sight. Sometimes you need to use removal when you don't want to use it, because you want to save, say, Felscream Blast for the OTK, but you need to know that, like, I will die next turn, so I need to do this, or I could die next turn, I guess. I need to do this to survive, so that way I can maybe make it to my OTK later with my Insane Draw. It just requires a lot of knowledge of the game and the deck. And also, every single season, my win rate's gotten higher and higher and higher with this deck. Last season, it was like 69%. The season before that, it was 65. This season, it's 75 with 20 games. And although that win rate might drop, still, it's a really high win rate for a deck like this. So I would highly recommend trying it out. It's not too expensive. Thalnos you get for free. Il'gynoth is the only real legendary you need. And it's a really fun deck once you learn how to play it. Not fun for the opponent, though. It basically takes everything I don't like about uninteractive gameplay in Hearthstone and basically puts it into this deck. But it doesn't feel as bad as, like, no Minion Mage because it does have a significantly weaker early game than, like, say, no Minion Mage. You can kill this deck early on sometimes if they don't have a good hand. And that's basically what you do. You go a little bit wide, mostly tall, because bigger minions are hard to kill with like Emolition Aura, and you'll probably win. Hopefully in the next mini expansion there's some way to interact with hands or decks in some way other than just Ticketus, so we can counter this OTK, but until then, it's really, really strong. So the last deck on this list is No Minion Mage. No Minion Mage after the nerfs is significantly weaker. Like, I didn't think it would be as much weaker as it is, but it is weaker. But it's still good. It's still viable. It still makes a splash in the meta. It's still strong. It just is a little bit weaker than it used to be. But overall, it's still a very powerful deck for the same reasons that it always used to be. Insane burst, no legendary, so it's cheap and anybody can make it. If you want to run Deck of Lunacy, maybe take out Shooting Stars and put it in. But Shooting Stars is just good to deal with early game aggro stuff. And yeah, that is about it. This deck is really, really good. It's not as strong as the other decks on this list, which is why I put it down at the bottom, but it's still a very strong, viable deck. And now we're going to move into the fun decks, so stay tuned. So the fun decks are this new archetype that I've been playing around with, which is Mill. Okay, so you have Mill Warrior. Most of these decks run Cthulhu, so that way you have more cards in your deck. And the general idea is to play cards like the Southsea Scoundrel and the Prize Vendor to A, make a control deck overdraw cards, right? Because if the opponent overdraws cards, they might lose a win condition, and make them go into fatigue sooner, and then you stack up armor because of your control deck. Sometimes you can cheese out a Clockwork Golem. This is especially good against Mage, because they're going to draw a lot of cards early and not quite play them. You drop Clockwork Giant out on turn 4 or 5, and then the opponent, the Mage, can't like Apexis Blast and kill it, right? Because it's 8 health, not 5. So they Apexis Blast it, don't kill it. You're a Control Warrior, you kill the minion, you slam them in the face for 8, and then they can't really do anything about it, or at least they need to put in even more resources to kill it off. And even against a lot of other decks, you just make them overdraw and have enough control to beat aggro decks. So overall, this deck is really, really fun. Runs King Mukla to make them overdraw. And overall, I would say it's an absolute blast. And this is very similar to Mill Priest. Mill Priest is a little bit different because you can actually mill them more and faster. Still runs Cthulhu. But the idea is you sacrifice a little bit of that control that Warrior has to tank up, gain a ton of armor before the game really starts going. And you have Raised Dead, which does a little bit of damage to you, but can allow you to get cards back like the Scoundrel, like the Prize Vendor, to mill them even faster. And it's basically the same concept. You mill them out, you draw a couple of cards, try to get to Cthulhu or a Clockwork Giant early on to win the game. And if not, you still have good control options to at least buy yourself a ton of time. And the last thing is, it's basically the same as this Rogue deck, except it's also a little bit different. Its gimmick is the fact that it has Ticketmaster and Malevolent Strike to combo with the Cthulhu and Shadow Step on these mill cards. But if you don't want to use Shadow Step on the mill cards because for whatever reason you make it super late into the game, you can save Shadow Step for maybe like Tenwu Alexstrasza for that potential OTK or 2 turn kill, depending on how the setup. And yeah, so there are a few gimmicks with each of these mill decks, but it's really, really fun. Currently trying to work on a mill shaman deck, and actually having these extra resource generators really makes up for the weak draw that shaman has. So not only are you milling your opponent, but you're covering up for a weakness that shaman generally has. And then the last thing that I would recommend is probably just Control Warrior here, because it's pretty decent, and again, it's good in a slower meta. It runs the Scoundrel, but not the Prize Vendor, and Weapon Rogue, because people aren't running weapon removal, and if you can draw a weapon, this deck will almost always win. So overall, those 3 mill decks are an absolute blast to play. Control Warrior, Weapon Rogue, and the last, I promise, honorable mention is Death Rattle Demon Hunter, which has proven to be pretty solid. I've had an absolute blast playing this version. I've played multiple versions, actually. This one is pretty solid. You can run anything, though, if you want. If you don't want to run, say, like the Fishy Flyer or, say, the Crimson Sigil Runner. There are tweaks you can make to it. But overall, still a very, very, very fun deck that is probably, other than OTK Demon Hunter, the second best iteration of Demon Hunter right now. There's also a version with N'Zoth for late game. I think it was a little bit too slow, but you can try it out if you want to. And that is about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you guys like, comment, subscribe. Come back next week where I'm going to basically be giving you guys the rundown of the meta and tier lists every single week. I was supposed to make this video like yesterday or the day before, but I lost track of time, so I apologize. But I'll get back on top of that. I will see you guys tomorrow, and hope you guys enjoyed.